Welcome, welcome. My name is Lloyd Borrell. I'm your host. Today, I'm thrilled to have as my guest Louise Gittleman. Louise is a New York Times best-selling author of over 30 books on diet, detox, the environment, and women's health. She's been recognized as one of the top 10 nutritionists in the country by Self magazine and has received the American Medical Writers Association Award for Excellence and the Humanitarian Award from the Cancer Control Society. Louise Gittleman, welcome to the EMF Health Summit.
Thank you, Lloyd. It's a pleasure and an honor and a privilege to be with you.
You're so kind. Honestly, it's a real pleasure to have you on, as you know, I think. So you are known as the First Lady of Nutrition, but I know that you have a fascinating EMF story. So perhaps we could start there. If you could share your EMF story, please.
Well, it was an EMF story that I never knew was an EMF story. Many years ago, I think it was 2002, 2003 to be exact, one of my skincare experts, she was a facialist of all people, noticed a little growth out of the side of my neck. And she said, well, that's never been there before. Maybe you should get it checked. And of course, I was so busy, I dismissed it. The growth was not just a little growth, it started to grow. And after a while, my husband said, you know, you've got something on the side of your neck that looks a little suspicious. I wonder what that could be. And I said, oh, it's nothing, until I looked in the mirror, started examining it, and I thought, well, maybe I have a lymph node that's inflamed or enlarged, and that would not be a good case. So I found a surgeon that I interviewed, and I said, could you do me a favor and can you take out whatever this thing is and biopsy it? So he did. The year was 2005. It only took me 2 years to actually do the surgical procedure. He took out this, what looked like a lymph node, which he thought was a lymph node, and it turns out, Lloyd, that this wasn't a lymph node. It turns out it was a benign parotid gland tumor. He had never seen anything like it. And I thought to myself, why would I get such a weird thing? I knew that the parotid gland was a digestive gland. I knew that individuals that had mumps had issues with the parotid gland, but why at my age was I getting a parotid gland tumor? I then later found, even later, many years later, that this was considered an issue with individuals that were tethered to their cell phones. And as it turned out, I was living, breathing, sleeping with my cell phone near my head 24/7. I was on the road, I was in planes, I was in elevators. And although we can't make the definitive connection scientifically, the research seems to indicate, particularly the research that's out of Israel, that a great many parotid gland tumors that are benign and otherwise are related to extensive and continuous cell phone use. So that started my personal journey, so to speak, to figure out what EMFs were, why cell phone radiation was so toxic, and why the heck I developed a tumor when the whole world seemed to be living, breathing, and sleeping with their cell phones at the time. Yeah,
and that was the inspiration. I was looking around if I brought it, but I've not. I think I've left it downstairs, your book.
It's here.
That was obviously
I got it.
Inspiration. I was going to show you it because it's very dog-eared and very marked and earmarked, and because I read it. And it was one of the first books, I think, if not the first that I read, really.
It was one of the first. It was one of the first in 2010 when it was still basically a new topic. You know, we had known about big pharma and big tobacco, but nobody was talking about big wireless. So it was a little controversial, quite a lot controversial at the time. People weren't ready to hear that perhaps EMFs could be harming your health. And now it's almost become a mainstream topic, for which I'm very grateful.
Yes, and as you say, almost, but not quite a mainstream topic, and which is one of the reasons that we're speaking here today, is because people need to understand about the dangers. And so that's what I want to ask you, this question, and I've asked it to most of my guests, but I'll ask it to you too, because it's fundamental. Why are EMFs so dangerous?
Well, they're dangerous because they're freaky frequencies. They're not natural to the human body. You know, we grew up in an ambient environment where we were exposed to natural low-level radiation, whether it's from the sun or from the lightning striking the earth. But these particular man-made alien frequencies are certainly not normal to your heart or to your brain. They have these strange pulsating patterns, these signaling characteristics, and these crazy waveforms that your body can't recognize and then goes into stress mode. So when your body is exposed to an EMF, even the lowest level EMF, you produce 20 stress proteins. They're called heat shock proteins. So it means that your cortisol levels go wild and you go on shutdown in terms of your cell and your cell membrane. So they are completely abnormal to the system.
Yeah, so they are, and it's a bit like a shock to the system, but it's a gentle shock to the system, isn't it? That's the thing, because if it was like a severe, abrupt shock to the system, then we would feel it, but most people don't feel it. People that do feel it are those people that we call electro-hypersensitive, but most people don't feel it, do they? And that's the issue.
They don't feel it. Well, they don't feel it, they don't see it, they don't smell it, they don't taste it. But little by little, this is a major immune system depressor. So little by little, the constant shocking of the system, and that's a good way of saying it, allows us to decrease our immunity, number one, to decrease our melatonin, number two, to shut down glutathione, number three, and then the cell membrane can't allow good nutrients in and the toxins out. So it does a real number on the system. I think for many of us in this day and age of autoimmunity, it's the driver that caused us to go over the edge.
Yeah, because autoimmune diseases are off the charts. Cancer, I mean, we don't know because it's so hard to prove, but you know, cancer, brain tumors, Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, the list is so long, which
I agree with you. They're mystery diseases of our civilization, but they weren't known. You know, I've been around for several decades at this point. I've written over 30 books. I see a lot of clients. I have online communities. But the kind of diseases and dysfunction that you're seeing now, you didn't see 10 to 15 years ago. And the only difference that I see, in addition to the glyphosates out there, to the nano-aluminum that's pervasive in the environment, is the prolific, prodigious, and never-ending 24/7 bombardment of cell phone frequencies and other Wi-Fi frequencies as well. So the point being is that this is an environmental toxin. It's like heavy metals, it's like chemicals, it's like your glyphosates, and we have to regard it as such. But you can't get around it. If you eat foods that have the glyphosates, then you know you can try to avoid it with 100% organic if possible. But you can't avoid what's going on in your neighbor's house, what's at your movie theater, what's in the airplane. That's what the problem is.
Indeed, and it's kind of, and then we can also compare it to smoking, can't we? Certainly, in terms of what the industry is doing to massage the figures, so to speak, and the studies, because they have this tremendous power. The communications industry, the utility company.
Well, they destroy independent scientists is what goes on. They discredit the independent scientists. I know many of them personally, so it becomes a real battle. And big wireless has a lot of money behind it. It's a tremendously big industry. So it seems to me that this is not going to end. The barrage of the EMF environment is only going to get worse, certainly with the rollout of 5G. We're going to be surrounded even more prolifically, prodigiously, and intently. So it's up to us to make our bodies an impenetrable fortress. You have to become invincible, and that's why I write Zapped.
Yeah, and so there are other dangers, which we've talked about a little bit. There's a biological harm, which you've laid out in terms of how it affects the immune system and the cell membrane. And the blood-brain barrier, and
It
just
makes leaks in the blood-brain barrier. Can you imagine that? So you get a leaky blood-brain barrier, and who knows what's going into the brain? That may be the virus, the nanoviruses, the retroviruses, parasites, problems with heavy metals. So it does that. But beyond that, it also breaks DNA, which has been proven by the late Martin Blank. May he rest in peace. He was a dear friend. It has issues in terms of the calcium flux of your body. You start losing calcium from the cell membranes, so the cellular communication goes awry. You start stockpiling calcium in your soft tissues, which is why on tissue mineral analysis, we are seeing calcium levels go through the roof. I've been doing that for 20 years. I've never seen what I see now, and that's because of the calcium flux. You have problems with the respiratory tract. I see individuals with a type of asthma, type 3 diabetes, which I think is EMF driven. I also see problems in terms of the dermatological issues. You see problems with skin that you've never seen, nosebleeds, very strange things that you have no other recourse for is what is happening with constant EMF exposure. And it's very hard to pinpoint because you don't know where you're getting it from. Is it your neighbor? Is it the satellites? Is it your cell phone? Is it your iPad? Is it your smart meter, which is another problem that we haven't even touched upon?
Yeah. And so it impacts us in all these ways. And another way, which was talking about with Dr. Zach Bush, was how it impacts our microbiome. And that's some very interesting research he's been doing too, which is all part of who we are, because the microbiome is super important. We're learning more and more about this. And that's
it's the second immune system, and that's where the issue comes into play. So this is a major depressor of the immune system, but not just the gut. It's affecting the brain and the heart. There's so many individuals, older individuals with problems with the heartbeat, the heart rhythm, so that they're running to the hospital. And a lot of times that's because they've installed a mobile phone right near the bed. So you're getting the weirdest things that are happening to people that you never found before. And I say it's the tremendous proliferation of EMFs that are in the environment that you no longer can escape unless you take certain measures.
Yes, which we're going to talk about. And then we've got notably, I know, which I think you talk about in your book, is we've got these sectors of the population which are particularly vulnerable. So you talked about old people, pregnant women, and also children. Let's not forget children. We talked about this quite a bit on the site, but it's just so important how it's affecting our children and children before they're even born. You know, there are studies to show this, and Dr. Klinghardt even has found this correlation between mothers that were exposed to cell phone type radiation and certain diseases like autism.
Yes, and so I think it's just incredible to understand that. Probably the most unusual connection that I have found is that in the presence of mold, EFAs or EMFs actually increase 800-fold. So if you have a moldy environment, and it was one of my additional issues, then you're going to be that much more sensitive to EMFs. So it becomes much more powerful. And all of us are exposed to mycotoxins and grains this day and age. We're exposed to molds that are in the environment, fungus, all kinds of issues thanks to the overuse of antibiotics. So that goes all the way back to the microbiome, but it also affects the respiratory tract. Correct. So EMFs come into play directly and indirectly, and that we have to, as much as we can, lessen our exposure. It is the most inconvenient truth we have in this day and age, Lloyd, but lessening the exposure and heightening awareness are two keys.
Yeah, just to develop on the mold there, which is because the thing is, this is quite a modern home, but people think mold you get in like dirty old buildings, but even somewhere very clean, we had mold over the shower. You could actually see it, because that's the thing with mold, you can't always see it. And we've got this interaction, and mold, the mold spores, they permeate out into the air. And so it's something, again, it's not just the EMFs, it's not just the mold, it's not just the heavy metals, It's not just the glyphosate, as you said, but it's all these things together which are working to create this perfect storm of ill health.
Of toxic overload is what it is.
Yeah.
It's tremendously toxic overload. So the ability to detoxify becomes suppressed, and we have to then go internally and externally to protect ourselves with certain equipment, with certain jewelry, with certain elements on our cell phones, whatever it takes to protect the subtle energy fields that also surround our own bodies, the biomagnetic energy field.
Very good point, because of course we're not these mechanistic Newtonian beings that most that we can just pop a pill and it's not all about chemicals. We are subtle energy beings. Essentially, we are subtle.
We're electrical beings. We're energy beings, and that's why our heart can be diagnosed in terms of taking any kind of cardiovascular test, and we can do that. An MRI is actually an electrical type of a test, the brain. So all of that is involved with some facet of electricity.
Exactly.
And I find it, and so the concept that we're not affected by the subtle EMFs and the proliferation of EMFs, which is 100 million times more now than it was in our grandparents' time, it's absurd to me that we're not being affected. We're all being affected. It's just a matter as to what degree.
It is absurd, yeah, because mainstream medicine's using the EEGs and the ECGs and all this, and that's measuring electrical currents. And at the same time, was saying, well, EMFs are safe. It just doesn't make any sense. And also, we're using, PEMFs for, these pulse frequencies, and that's accepted that can be beneficial. And yet, there's other frequencies that we're saying, well, that those frequencies can affect us, but these other frequencies don't affect us. It doesn't make any sense. It is absurd, isn't it?
We're in denial, and that's because it's inconvenient. It's an inconvenient truth. To me, that's the most, it's the pink elephant dancing in the middle of the room. And it's absurd to think that you're not being affected. We're all being affected, again, as to the amount. And the other thing that I'm seeing is that there's the problem with obesity, and that's really what my bailiwick is. I'm a nutritionist. I'm not an electrical engineer. And I'm finding a lot of individuals are not able to lose weight because of that cortisol connection with EMFs and the constant stress protein production. So lowering EMFs in the environment and doing certain things that we'll talk about in the home environment and to protect your own biofield becomes even more important if you want to look good. Not just feel good, but look good.
Yeah, and Dr. Sam Milham, who I've interviewed previously, not on the summit, but I've spoken to him previously. I know he's also done some studies on obesity and found a correlation. So he's an epidemiologist, and he's found a correlation between electrification. So he went back through, did a lot of work looking at records of parts of the US that were electrified, comparing with non-electrified, comparing with the Amish population, because there's a lot of things we can learn still by looking at the Amish population, for instance, which perhaps I don't know if they've got cell phones, but some of them don't have electricity, and pretty much the rest of the world which has got electricity. So yeah, this link to, and he noted also this link to obesity. So there is clearly a link to obesity, which is a massive problem, particularly
massive, and it's not getting any better. That's the issue, and that was one of the reasons, one of the hidden secret reasons. I'll let you in on a secret that I wrote another book. It's called Radical Metabolism, and in it, the diet is chock full of the most EMF protective foods. Now, I didn't tell everybody that was the reason they were in the program, but quite frankly, the highest antioxidant food to protect yourself against obesity is none other than coffee, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
It's rather shocking to understand, but of all the foods that I looked at it when I was writing Zapped, of all the foods in the ORAC table, the one that they didn't analyze the way they should have was coffee, a very pure source of mold-free coffee. And the highest source of mold in the diet that nobody knows about is coffee, unless it's mold-free. So I write about the particular brand and offer it at radicalmetabolism.com, because that's how you can detoxify yourself, protect yourself, thereby protecting yourself against type 2 diabetes, liver disease, and heart disease. So it all goes back to antioxidants and infusing your system so you can withstand whatever is coming to us from the assaults in the environment.
So perhaps we could go there then now. Eat to beat
I love food.
EMFs.
I love food.
Let's talk about food, yeah. Eat to beat EMFs, and that's the name of a PDF which people can get, which you kindly offered for people who sign up to the summit. So Eat to beat EMFs. So yeah, let's talk about that. What can we do in terms of EMF protection, in terms of nutrition?
Well, you've got to get foods that are high in antioxidants to kind of stop that free radical process which occurs with any type of radiation, be it the low-level biological radiation that we're getting, as well as the radiation you're getting from nuclear plants, which we haven't even talked about, which is another major issue for some of us living 100 miles from a plant, or that are involved with the Fukushima residue that's still coming and affecting us. So number one, let's talk about my favorite herb. The herb of the day, the herb of the hour, is none other than rosemary, which is very high in antioxidants and has been found to be very protective against EMFs. And it's good for the memory, interestingly enough. So taking rosemary, organic, non-irradiated rosemary, using it in stews, when you're roasting, when you're putting foods on the grill, using an essential oil of rosemary, very helpful in protecting your system and strengthening your biofield. That's an easy one, to be honest with you, Lloyd. So we've got rosemary, number two.
And it tastes great. I love rosemary.
Number one, I should say. I love rosemary myself. That's why it's used in a lot of oils, because it's a powerful antioxidant. Yeah. And it protects against lipid peroxidation. So you've got rosemary. And the number two is none other than the coffee that I mentioned, specifically the brand that I talk about at radicalmetabolism.com that you get if you pre-order the book. I have to say that because,
sorry, just on the coffee question, we don't know where we stand, do we? Because you know, there's studies which are saying coffee's good for you, and then there's others which are saying it's bad for you. I mean,
well, it's not good for you.
So there's a real coffee culture. I'm not a big coffee person.
We live on it, but if you're taking coffee that's loaded with pesticides, as most is, and loaded with mold, then you're in for a problem. If you're taking a heavy roasted coffee rather than a medium roast, you're destroying the polyphenols, which are so protective against EMFs. So there are major issues in terms of the kind of coffee that you're ingesting. But I think the real issue here, which bears repetition, is that it's a high source of mold unless it's analyzed to be mold-free, which is one of the reasons that we have a particular brand in our country that's so popular. But that brand is not organic, number one. It hasn't been third-party tested to my knowledge, number two, and it's not the highest in antioxidants. When you look on a periodic table and you take a look at the foods that are highest in antioxidants, which are also going to protect you against EMFs, you think of blueberries, you think of cranberries, you think of acai, you think of all these very tropical superfoods. But coffee is almost 50 times as much in terms of the antioxidants. So it is an answer to many of our ills, particularly if it's mold-free and if it's organic. And that's what I'll say about coffee. And
so
it's a shock.
Could you just say one more thing about coffee? What brand?
I'm going to tell you the brand. It's Purity. And when I researched the book and I knew about caffeic acid, which I first introduced in this book, I thought to myself, I've got to have a high antioxidant, organic, mold-free coffee in my new diet book, because not only will they lose weight with radical metabolism, but they're also going to protect their systems against EMFs, and EMFs are dramatically related to obesity. So it's kind of like it's my hidden agenda. It's my enlightened self-interest here. So I'm promoting the book Radical Metabolism, and everybody will get a 30% coupon in one of the downloads.
Excellent. Okay. So coffee, and again, so everybody that's listening is not necessarily in the US, but what you're saying is it's not the organic, non-organic, the question, it's the mold issue that we need to, but that,
and remember,
we don't know unless it's been analyzed.
Well, in this this particular coffee, there's a real backstory with it. And the fellow is an English fellow, I think, that originated that did all the major compilation of the research. And then they're found to be the #1 coffee in the world, by the way. So it can be available worldwide.
Okay.
But beyond that, I think what's important is that there's a mold EMF connection, and mold is a big issue in this country. I mean, it's one of those hidden environmental factors, but it's dramatically related to the EMFs. I'll say it again just for repetition. And that's why what you're eating is so important to protect you then downstream against EMFs, which means that you've got to have mold-free nuts and seeds. You should be fermenting them. You should be roasting them. A little dry roast is fine to settle the oil and to possibly kill the molds. And you should also be sprouting them if you can. So there's all sorts of things that you
So this mold in our food supply is a major issue, in your view?
Oh, it's a major issue that nobody's recognizing. Yes, that's one of the reasons that they irradiate so many spices and many staples, because of mold and because of bacteria. So the other thing that's important is to have a high quality whey protein as your #3 most important food. And all this is in the download. But the whey protein that's 100% organic from A2 milk, the non-mutated casein milk, that's important because it's a precursor for glutathione that EMFs seem to zap. So you want to make sure that you're getting your glutathione, you're getting your melatonin in the #4 food, which are tart cherries. A little cherry juice goes a long way in helping to make you sleep properly, getting your synchronicity in tow. And I also think what's important is that you have a lot of artichokes in your diet, because it's another high antioxidant food. So there's quite a few foods. I think we list about 20 foods, Lloyd, in that free download.
Yeah, my wife bought artichokes today. I'd never eaten an artichoke before. I was like probably about 20 years old. And I led a very sheltered life.
You're sheltered, but you know something with artichokes, they don't lose their antioxidants if they're steamed or if they're boiled or if they're raw. I don't know if you can have them actually raw, but you have to steam them, cook them. Sometimes they broil them, and it's the artichoke hearts that are so delicious and very, very good for the liver.
Tips. It depends what size, because if you go to Italy, you've got these little baby artichokes. You can eat the whole thing, and it's absolutely delicious. Whereas here in France, with the bigger, the ones she bought today are like this big, but sometimes we get them this big.
Oh, yum!
The tips.
Yum.
Vinaigrette, with olive oil, balsamic vinegar.
Olive oil. Let's talk a little. Olive oil is very protective for the cell membranes, as are the good omega-6s. Hemp seed oil. Oh my gosh, which is a focal point in my new book. Hemp seed oil is protective against radiation because it protects the cell membrane. The cell membrane is made from saturated fats and omega-6, not just omega-3s, but omega-6 fatty acids. So there's a lot you can do to beat EMS, but you have to make a concerted effort to insert all of these particular foods into your diet: breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks.
Because the oils are very important, aren't they? Because so it's avoiding poor quality oils, obviously, which are in processed foods, like certain breads and things, and then it's getting these high quality oils, and there are so many different oils, aren't there? Sesame seed oil is one. I'm trying to think of the names. I'm only thinking of words in French, but we've got a whole cupboard full of oils, different oils, chanvre we call it in French. Oils are so important because it's back to the cell membrane again, isn't it?
It's the cell membrane. I call oils membrane medicine.
Yes.
And they should be higher in the omega-6, which is a cell membrane structural EFA. And that's what the key is. And that's why I think that these foods I've mentioned are so helpful in protecting against not just EMFs, but other toxins in the environment. So this is a one-stop shop for protection.
It is. And then just to complete the circle, is this, and why, membrane medicine, why is it important, particularly in terms of EMFs? And that just means in terms of everybody's health, because everybody's health has been affected by these EMFs, is because we know from notably the studies by Dr. Martin Paul that it's really messing up what's going on with our cell brain in terms of this calcium influx. So it's looking at
Yes,
looking
it,
after the cell membrane is like really the key.
it's the key that's overlooked. The cell membrane is important. It needs to be fluid, not rigid. When your body is impacted by an EMF from your cell phone, it becomes very rigid. So you cannot get nutrients in and you cannot get toxins out. You want to keep it nice and fluid. And these particular oils that I talk about in the book and in the EMF download that people are getting is also important, is the carrier for calcium, because that calcium connection that Martin Pall identifies is very key to why cellular communication goes awry.
Mm.
So
And the other
very
thing is when
important.
we've got the oils, because hydration is so important, is ever more important because we're being zapped 24/7. That's causing this dehydration, or it's adding to it certainly. And so then we're drinking, but it's not just about drinking more water, about drinking more fluid hydration, is it? It's about having, yeah, I've got mine here too. It's about the oils, because if you don't have the oils, then the oils are determining the quality of your cell membrane, and that is determining, to what degree
Your cell, the health of your entire body, very, very much so. See, you've read Radical Metabolism, you know the book. That's it exactly. That's so true, so true.
I've not even read the book.
But you see, you're knowledgeable and passionate enough about the topic to know what the crux of the matter is, and it all goes back to the cellular membrane. Membrane is everything.
Yeah. So, so in terms of nutrition, anything else you want to add to this? So you've given me rosemary, coffee, whey, tart cherries. You talked about the berries. Anything else you want to say here on this? It's about
some of the other foods in terms of most of them, they're herbs and spices that are good. Thyme has a little bit of EMF value, and you can get it in an essential oil. It's known as yarrow, Yarrow. Yarrow is an essential oil, is considered to be very protective against outside influences, including radiation. So that would be another one people can look for.
Yeah. And of course, the best thing in my view is if you can grow this stuff in your garden. We've got a small garden, and we've got thyme, and we've got rosemary, and a few other herbs too, which are really easy to grow. Actually, our rosemary died this year because it's very cold, but it's very inexpensive to buy a little, tiny little rosemary plant.
And I know. It's so terrific. One of my clients was telling me that when her husband just sniffed the rosemary oil, his brain fog seemed to clear.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's pretty darn potent. Shakespeare even wrote about it many centuries ago. So there you have it. It stood the test of time.
Yeah. And you don't even need a garden. You can just have it in a pot. If you don't have a garden, then you can have all these herbs, a regular supply of these herbs very easily and very cheaply as well. That's the other thing is this is really, these are low-cost solutions. So that maybe there are the blueberries and the cranberries, depends on what part of the world you're in, but they can be expensive. But a lot of what you're saying here, it's not terribly expensive to apply this.
No, it is not.
So let's talk about more general then, in terms of, because you're very au fait with what EMFs do, electromagnetic fields do, all these different forms of electromagnetic fields. And one of the things I remember reading in your book was how EMFs around the perimeter are often concentrated around the perimeter of rooms. And that was a bit of for me at the moment, when I read that was quite an eye-opener. And of course, that's because we've got wiring which is running around the rooms. Therefore, we've got electric fields. Therefore, we've got magnetic fields. Therefore, we've got, no doubt, dirty electricity. And obviously, it's a generalization because you can have hot spots, but it's a good thing to bear in mind. Another thing I learned in your book is one CT scan exposes you to 500 times more radiation than an X-ray. So it's like, don't go for a CT scan unless you absolutely have to.
Exactly.
There's so many of these treatments that people are taking which are just so intrusive and to be avoided at all costs. And okay, they are wonderful in certain circumstances, but the CT scan, and one of my previous guests was telling me how he actually had a fit. He went into a coma through
Oh my gosh.
through a CT scan. So be very careful using those kind of devices.
Well, and some people get very disoriented with an MRI. We tend to think an MRI, no radiation, but it impacts the body on a very subtle level, and that biological level takes time to recoup from.
Yeah, absolutely. MRI, CT, be very careful. So let's talk. Yeah, so you are, as I say, so you got this tumor, which was fortunately a benign tumor. And then you wrote your book. I think that was in 2005. You said, so we're looking about, quite a few years ago. And obviously, once you've had that kind of experience, and once you've made this connection with EMFs, then you are aware, aren't you? Because EMFs are everywhere, and so that means your life changes. As my life changed when I became EHS. So could you share to us, with us, what you do in your life to deal with EMFs?
So in my home, people take off their shoes and I take their cell phones. We don't allow cell phone use in the home, number one. The home is wireless, number two. Number three.
So there's no wireless, you mean?
There's no wireless, but we're wired because it's part of life in this day and age.
Yeah.
And then at night, we shut off the electricity to the master bedroom. We shut the breakers down. And you can do that, if you get an electrician, they can do that pretty easily. We do that, which really makes me sleep very soundly. When we don't do that, because I have guests and it affects the electricity going to their room, I don't sleep as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that we did, because I had a building biologist that came to the house, when this started to occur, I went into, really heavy duty marathon mode. I said, I got to clean up something going on in the house. I invited a building biologist to the home. He found out through his very sophisticated testing that there was a great deal of cell phone radiation coming from a tower across the river. We live on the river, and, water magnifies radiation, as does minerals. So it was coming directly into the master bedroom, right near where I was sleeping. So we slept in a tent, an EMF protective tent, for over a year until it got so dusty that we took off the tent. We turned the tent, which was made from a Swiss Army fabric, some sort of Swiss material.
Swiss Shield.
Yeah, Swiss Shield, that was it. We got it from Less EMF.
Yes.
And we made it into curtains so that it protected the incoming radiation from affecting us with these curtains, which was a really clever way of protection. So we do that. And then the other thing we do is we ground ourselves as much as we can. So I take off my shoes and I stand in what I consider to be a healthy little pot of earth, on my property, so that I'm grounding, and then I infuse my body with all these electrons that can neutralize and kind of dispel the static electricity. So basically I do that. And I also wear shungite. I've done research.
That's what I've got in here.
Oh, you got shungite water. Well, oh, how cool is that? Well, I wear shungite. Normally I wear something around my neck. I have that. I have a cell phone. Can I show this?
Yeah, of course.
All right, I use a cell phone.
It's not a chip, is it?
It's from a group called Altera, and I tested it. It does not do anything. Here's what I'm going to say. When you test some of these elements, it doesn't affect the EMFs themselves. They're still out there. You will not see a difference on the meter. What I check is my blood, because I have a high-powered microscope. So I check it with my blood. When I put this on the phone, used it without and with it, I found that there was an ending of the stickiness, no rouleau. I saw it normal, healthy cells. I use a whole house plug from Altera. I sleep with a pillow. And I do that and I feel better.
Yeah.
So it's shungite, Altera. I like the company. They have it's a paramagnetic mineral that they use. I take it internally. That's what I do.
Mhm.
Now, I think for everybody else that travels a great deal, they have to do some kind of cell phone protection. Get shungite wherever you can. There's a lot of research about
Yes.
shungite, and carbon 60 is the latest, greatest protection.
Yes.
Carbon 60 you can get, it's rather expensive, but this innately contains carbon 60, so it's very protective against radiation by extending your protective biofield 5 to 8 feet. And there's research that
There is
confirms that.
some, yeah, there is some research on the shungite.
There's
Personally,
actually a
I'm
lot of
more
research.
these kind of natural solutions is what works for me and what I believe in. And so the chips and the harmonizers and so on. I'm not saying don't go there, but what I say to people is do the rigorous, EMF protection first, which is what you've been talking about here, in terms of what you do in your bedroom and the
Yes, because if you rely,
use your cell phone, and then maybe look at that. But do that first. You have to do things.
no, you have to lessen your exposure. There's no question, and you cannot have a false sense of safety just by using these devices. So being as sensitive as I am, Lloyd, I do it all, and I'm in a position where I get things sent to me every other week that is purported to be an EMF protective device. I do my own testing. I do my blood before and after, and if I believe if it works for me, I share it with my community.
Yes, yes. So, so there's lots of things we can do, and that is the thing, of course, because you are sensitive, and I'm still sensitive, but not hypersensitive. And that's the thing. I think once you've been impacted by EMFs, then you've got this awareness about it, and I think that never leaves you. And touch wood, I will never be hypersensitive like I was. It was a complete nightmare.
Well, but it's like anything. Once you've been sensitized, then you can't be desensitized. You have a more, you almost attract that to yourself again. You're exposed again.
Yeah.
That's why it's important. And then the other thing, just to add to that, because nutrition is my forte, what I also tell my people to protect them against EMFs and the other onslaught from the environment. If they do an MTHFR, kind of a genetic test, let's see how many detox pathways are open and closed. And that way I know how to more personalize what they're doing. I did the test with the 1298 and the 677. Have you done the test?
No.
I think you should do the test. I'll tell you why it's important. When I did the test, I have 3 detox pathways that are closed. I am a true canary. So there's a reason that who thought she was doing everything right, got the parotid gland tumor that started me on my journey.
Okay. So please explain what these tests are. Who do we see? Is it a functional medicine doctor?
I don't know if you can order it online. Request a Test has the ability to order some of these things online. But it's an MTHFR test that will test for the 2 particular genes, and many people have what they call variations of the genes. They call them SNPs, and if so, it will tell you your ability to detoxify. Most people that I have seen of my clients that are sensitive have 2 to 3 pathways that are blocked. I'm the most sensitive of all. I have 3 pathways blocked, and it's in my DNA. So I couldn't help it, but you can override it by doing all kinds of protective things to your body, to the nutrients, and lessening your exposure.
And the other thing is to not make this your enemy, because if you are feeling this, then it's a normal human reaction in large part. So obviously for people that are hypersensitive, then life becomes unlivable. It can be, but having a sensitivity, feeling this is a normal human reaction, because what is not normal is these EMFs, these exposures, these frequencies. They're not normal, they're not healthy. So if you can sense them, then, as long as it's not impinging on how you lived your life,
thank God,
that is no bad thing.
Exactly. Thank God it's that your normal, your bodily GPS is working, is what I tell people.
It is working 100%. And honestly, you should rejoice in that. And, that was one of the things with me. I was very I was angry, and it was like, why me? And a victim mentality when it
You
happened.
can't. Well, I've been that way for a while, and then I realized that being so sensitive was a blessing because I could be a way shower for other people.
Exactly. And obviously inspired you to write that wonderful book and this wonderful new book, which is coming out, which I'm sure is going to help a lot of people. Just a last word, if we can, because we're running out of time. Supplements, what's your take on that? So obviously natural foods is better, always wins, but is there a case when we should be looking at supplements?
Some people need a little melatonin at night, at least 3 milligrams. I like a timed release melatonin, so melatonin most likely. I also think maybe a glutathione, whether you use a precursor. There are many precursors on the market. NAC is one of them. A product called ASEA is another. The whey protein is a precursor for glutathione. Some people use liposomal glutathione. So because CMF zap melatonin and glutathione, you want to supplement therein. They're antioxidants and hormones, which are very important to the body. And something that's very high in general antioxidants. So that's where maybe astaxanthin comes into play, a particular kind of vitamin E. And you can't go wrong with vitamin C and bioflavonoids.
Yeah. And any kind of supplements or organic supplements, what's your take on that?
The best supplements are those that are certified, that can be organic or derived from the best raw material sources. And I think that if people take a look on my site, they'll find the supplements that I personally recommend.
Okay, great. Any last comments, observations you want to share before we close up today?
Well, I think that EMFs are here to stay, number one. So you got to make friends with it, number two. Number three, do whatever you can to protect yourself and your own biofield, and you can eat to beat EMFs, and then from there on in, go and enjoy your life.
Great information. Where can people find out more about what you do? Please remind us.
Radicalmetabolism.com is a very good source to get the latest, greatest information on what I feel nutritionally, which will help you be able to withstand the EMFs, number one. Number two, AnnLouise.com. So you've got two sources, but I think Radical Metabolism will get them involved with the diet, the lifestyle that you need to be healthy for a very long time. At least till 120.
Yeah, at least. So we've both got a long way to go still. Louise Gittleman.
I don't have as long a way to go as you do. Don't worry about it.
Quite a way, I think. Excellent information. I love your passion about this. Thank you for writing that book, which helps so many people. Talking about, the ZAP book. Best of luck with your new book, which I'm sure is going to help a lot of people. Really great that you're talking about EMFs in there too. Thank you so much for being on the EMF Health Summit.
It was terrific. Thank you so much.
And for all of you who've joined us today, thank you for being part of this movement. Stay tuned for the next session. My name is Lloyd Borrell. Take care. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye.